Imagine this. You're on a much-needed vacation with your family. The sun is warm, the days are filled with laughter and the carefree joy of children playing. You're in a seemingly safe and idyllic resort, surrounded by other families just like yours. You put your children to bed, tucking them in with a kiss and a whispered "I love you," and join your friends for dinner just a stone's throw away. You check on them periodically, their peaceful slumber a reassuring sight. But then, in a fleeting moment, in the sliver of time between one check and the next, your world shatters. Your child is gone, vanished without a trace. This is the chilling reality that befell Kate and Jerry McCann on the evening of May 3rd, 2007. Their 3-year-old daughter, Madeline, a bright and beautiful little girl with a distinctive dark mark in her right eye, disappeared from their holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, a resort town in the Algarve region of Portugal. What followed was an international media frenzy, a massive and often chaotic police investigation, and a desperate, unending search by her parents that continues to this day. To understand this devastating mystery, we must first go back to the beginning, to the days leading up to that fateful night. The McCanns, Kate and Jerry, both respected and successful physicians from Rothley, Leicestershire in the UK, had decided to take a spring holiday with their 3 children. There was Madeline, who was just days away from her 4th birthday, and the energetic 2-year-old twins, Sean and Emily. They weren't alone. They were part of a larger group of friends, all with young children, who would later become known to the world as the Tapas 7. This group consisted of the McCanns and 3 other couples, Fiona and David Payne, Rachel and Matthew Oldfield, and Russell O'Brien, who was there with his partner, Jane Tanner. In total, 9 adults and their 8 children, all looking forward to a week of relaxation and shared camaraderie. Their destination was the Mark Warner Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz. The name itself, Beach of Light, evokes images of sun-drenched tranquility. It was a popular destination for British families, a self-contained world of swimming pools, tennis courts, and supervised children's activities, all designed to give parents a much-needed break. The McCanns were staying in apartment 5A, a ground-floor unit in a 2-story block. It was clean, functional, but crucially, its patio doors at the back opened onto a small terrace and a public path. This path led directly towards the resort's communal areas, including the Tapas restaurant, a mere 55 meters away. This proximity was the key factor in the group's evening routine. It seemed so close, so safe. It was a decision that would be endlessly debated, but for the McCanns and their friends, in the seemingly secure bubble of the holiday resort, leaving the children sleeping while they dined nearby, felt like an acceptable risk. They established a system. One of the adults would physically go and check on the sleeping children every half hour. The first few days of the holiday, which began on April 28th, passed in a blur of sunny, unremarkable happiness. The children spent their days in the resort's kids' club, while the adults relaxed by the pool or played tennis. The evenings were reserved for the adults, a chance to unwind over dinner and conversation at the Tapas restaurant. On the morning of May 3rd, Kate McCann took a photograph that would become seared into the public memory. It shows Madeline sitting on the edge of a tennis court, a wide-brimmed sun hat perched on her head, her blonde hair in pigtails. She's looking away from the camera, a tennis racket in hand, a playful, innocent grin on her face. It is the last known photograph of Madeline McCann. That evening, the routine began as it had on previous nights. Around 7 p.m., the McCanns put their children to bed. Madeline was in a single bed near the door of the bedroom she shared with her twin siblings, who were sleeping in travel cots. She wore pink Eeyore pajamas. At approximately 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry left the apartment, closing the unlocked patio door behind them, and walked the short distance to the tapas restaurant to join their friends. The timeline of the next 90 minutes is critical. The group was seated at a table on the edge of the restaurant's terrace. Their view of apartment 5A was partially, but not completely, obscured by shrubs and a low wall. At around 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann left the table to perform the first check. He entered the apartment through the patio doors. He went to the children's bedroom and saw them all sleeping. He did notice something slightly unusual. The bedroom door was wide open, when they had left it only slightly ajar. He thought perhaps Madeline had gotten up and left it open before getting back into bed. He pulled the door to, leaving it slightly ajar again, and spent a moment in the bathroom before returning to the restaurant. Around 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, another member of the group, left the restaurant to check on her own children. As she walked up the road past the McCann's apartment, she saw something that, at the time, seemed insignificant. She saw a man walking away from the direction of the apartment, carrying a small child in his arms. The child appeared to be sleeping and was wearing what looked like pink pajamas. Jane assumed it was another holidaymaker taking their child home from the resort's night nursery. She didn't get a clear look at the man's face. This would later become the famous Tanner sighting, a pivotal and heavily scrutinized piece of the puzzle. The next check was at approximately 9:30 p.m. Matthew Oldfield offered to check on the McCann children when he went to check on his own in the apartment next door. He entered apartment 5A, went to the children's bedroom doorway, and looked inside. He could clearly see the twins sleeping soundly in their cots. Madeline's bed, however, was positioned in such a way that he couldn't see into it from the doorway without entering the room further. Believing everything to be fine, and not wanting to risk waking the children by opening the door further and letting in light from the hallway, he left. He saw no signs of disturbance. It was at 10 p.m. that the world stopped turning for Kate McCann. It was her turn to do the check. She walked to the apartment and entered through the patio door. She immediately felt that something was wrong. The children's bedroom door, which Jerry had left almost closed, was now wide open. She walked into the room, and a wave of cold dread washed over her. The twins were still asleep in their cots, but Madeline's bed was empty. The window, which had been closed, was now open, and the exterior shutter was raised. Madeline was gone. Her favorite soft toy, a pink cat named Cuddle Cat, was left on the bed. A frantic, desperate search of the small apartment confirmed her worst fears. She ran back to the restaurant, her face a mask of sheer terror, screaming, "Madeline's gone! Someone's taken her!" The initial minutes were pure chaos. The friends and restaurant staff immediately fanned out, their voices calling Madeline's name echoing across the quiet resort. 100 people, guests, staff, anyone within earshot, joined the frantic, disorganized search, combing through bushes, looking under cars, checking swimming pools. But the little girl in the pink pajamas had vanished. The Portuguese police were not alerted for another 40 minutes at 10:41 p.m. When the local police, the GNR, did arrive, the scene inside the apartment had already been hopelessly contaminated by the dozens of people who had rushed in and out. There was no immediate sense of urgency, no sealing of the crime scene, no roadblocks set up, and crucially, no immediate alert sent to border police or airports. In a potential abduction case, these first few hours are what investigators call the golden hour, the period where the chances of success are highest. In Madeleine's case, Duali Siatkanis Ellen Cyprien, the golden hour was lost in a fog of chaos and procedural failure. The quiet holiday resort had become the epicenter of an unimaginable nightmare. The immediate aftermath of Madeleine McCann's disappearance was a whirlwind of frantic activity and crushing despair. As the sun rose on May 4, 2007, the true scale of the tragedy began to sink in, not just for the McCann family and their friends, but for the wider world. The initial chaotic search by guests and staff gave way to a more organized, but deeply flawed, official investigation. The local Guardia Nacional Republicana, or GNR, secured the area, but critical hours had already been lost. Soon, the case was handed over to the Polícia Judiciária, the PJ, Portugal's equivalent of the FBI. This marked the beginning of a formal criminal investigation that would soon spiral in a direction no one could have predicted. The world's media descended upon the small, sun-bleached town of Praia da Luz, turning a private nightmare into a global spectacle. Kate and Jerry McCann, in the depths of their grief, made the difficult decision to engage with the press. They were articulate, composed, and media-savvy, qualities that, while helping to launch a massive international awareness campaign, would paradoxically be used against them. Their faces were broadcast across the globe as they made heart-wrenching appeals for their daughter's return. The Find Madeline campaign was born, with a fund that would raise millions. The distinctive photo of Madeline in her sun hat became an emblem of lost innocence, recognizable in an instant. Celebrities, politicians, and business leaders lent their support. The pressure to find this one missing child was immense, a level of scrutiny that the Portuguese investigators were unaccustomed to, and it would seem, deeply uncomfortable with. The lead investigator for the PJ was Chief Inspector Gonçalo Amaral. In the early stages, the investigation followed the most logical path: abduction by a stranger. Police looked into known sex offenders in the area. They pursued leads based on the witness sightings from the night of the disappearance, particularly the Tanner sighting of a man carrying a child. A composite sketch of this man was released and circulated worldwide. Another sketch, based on the later Smith sighting, was also created, but these leads led nowhere. There was no ransom demand, no credible claim of responsibility. The trail was going cold, and the international pressure was mounting with each passing day. It was against this backdrop that the focus of the Portuguese investigation began to shift, slowly at first, and then with alarming momentum. The theory of an external abductor began to wane, replaced by a growing suspicion directed towards the McCanns and their friends. Several factors contributed to this change in direction. Firstly, the forensics from apartment 5A were yielding nothing. There were no signs of a forced entry. The shutter and window in the children's bedroom, which Kate had found open, could be opened from the outside, but doing so without making noise would have been difficult. Investigators began to question whether the scene had been staged. The unlocked patio door, which the McCanns had used to enter and exit, became a point of contention. To the investigators, it seemed a shockingly lax approach to security. Furthermore, the statements of the Tapas 7 were meticulously picked apart. The police found what they perceived to be inconsistencies and contradictions in their accounts of the evening. The group's relaxed holiday routine, particularly their practice of leaving the children sleeping while they dined nearby, was viewed with deep suspicion by the more conservative Portuguese authorities and public. What the friends saw as a reasonable arrangement within a safe holiday complex, the police began to see as a pattern of neglect. The cultural chasm between the British holidaymakers and the local investigators seemed to grow wider with each interview. Kate McCann, in particular, came under intense scrutiny. Her composure during press conferences was interpreted by some not as strength, but as a lack of genuine emotion. A diary she kept, in which she poured out her raw grief and desperate prayers, was seized by police and selectively leaked to the Portuguese press, with passages taken out of context to paint her as a cold and unstable mother. The tide of public opinion, initially so supportive, began to show signs of turning. The victims were slowly being recast as the villains. The investigation took its most dramatic and controversial turn in the summer of 2007. Frustrated by the lack of progress, the PJ formally requested assistance from the UK. In July, Two highly specialized British police sniffer dogs were flown to Portugal. One dog, a Springer Spaniel named Eddie, was a cadaver dog, trained to detect the specific scent of human decomposition. The other, a Springer Spaniel named Keela, was a crime scene investigation dog, trained to detect traces of human blood, even in minute quantities. What these dogs did, or what they were reported to have done, would irrevocably alter the course of the investigation. The dogs were first taken to apartment 5A. According to the police reports, Keela, the blood dog, alerted in the living room behind a sofa. Eddie, the cadaver dog, gave a stronger alert in the same spot, and also in a wardrobe in the McCann's bedroom. The dogs were then taken to other locations, including the villa the McCanns had moved to after the disappearance, and to the vehicles they had used. The most significant alerts came from the silver Renault Scenic, a car the McCanns had rented 24 days after Madeline disappeared. Keela alerted to the boot of the car, and Eddie gave what his handler described as a very strong alert to the scent of a corpse in the boot and on the car's key fob. For the Portuguese police, this was the smoking gun they had been looking for. Their new theory began to solidify. There was no abduction. Instead, they believed Madeline had died in an accident within the apartment, perhaps from an accidental overdose of sedatives given to help her sleep, a claim for which there was absolutely no evidence. The theory continued that the McCanns, both doctors, panicked. They hid their daughter's body, possibly inside the apartment for a period, before moving it in the rental car and disposing of it. The Tapa 7, they believed, were complicit in a cover-up, their statements designed to mislead police and create a false timeline. Armed with the sniffer dog evidence, the PJ moved to collect forensic samples from the locations where the dogs had alerted. Swabs were taken from the boot of the Renault Scenic and sent to the UK's highly respected Forensic Science Service (FSS) in Birmingham for analysis. The PJ was confident that these samples would contain Madeline's DNA and prove their theory. The results, when they came back, were far from conclusive. The FSS reported that they had found a partial DNA profile from the sample in the car boot. They concluded that the sample contained components from at least 3 different people. While 15 of the 19 DNA components matched Madeline's, the overall result was deemed too complex for any meaningful interpretation. In essence, the evidence was scientifically inconclusive. However, the Portuguese authorities presented a very different picture to the public and to the McCanns. They interpreted the result as a match, a definitive link between Madeline's body and the hire car. On September 7, 2007, 4 months after their daughter vanished, first Jerry and then Kate McCann were formally named as arguidos, a Portuguese legal term that translates roughly as formal suspect or person of interest. They were subjected to long and grueling interrogations. The police accused them directly of killing their daughter and covering it up. They reportedly offered Kate a deal, a reduced sentence, if she confessed to accidentally killing Madeline. The McCanns vehemently denied everything, clinging to their innocence in the face of an accusatory and seemingly insurmountable police case. The pressure became unbearable. They were trapped in a foreign country, accused of the most horrific crime imaginable, all while grieving for their missing child. 2 days after being declared official suspects on September 9, 2007, Kate and Jerry McCann, along with their twin children, flew back to the United Kingdom. Their departure was seen by some as an admission of guilt, a flight from justice. For the McCanns, it was a desperate retreat to the relative safety of home, to continue their fight for their daughter and to clear their names from afar, leaving the investigation in Portugal to proceed under a dark and heavy cloud of suspicion that now hung squarely over them. The flight back to Britain on September 9, 2007, was not an escape for Kate and Jerry McCann. It was a strategic retreat. Having been declared arguidos, or formal suspects by the Portuguese authorities, they were now fighting a war on two fronts: the desperate, all-consuming search for their missing daughter, and the fight to clear their own names from the shadow of an unimaginable accusation. Back on home soil, they were surrounded by family and a support system, but the suspicion that had taken root in Portugal had followed them across the water. The British tabloid press, in particular, was merciless. Every photograph, every public appearance, was dissected. A trip to the shops, a moment of fleeting laughter, anything could be twisted into evidence of their supposed guilt. Meanwhile, the Portuguese investigation, now firmly anchored to the theory of the McCann's involvement, continued, but with little new evidence to show for it. The case against them was almost entirely circumstantial, built on the contested alerts from the sniffer dogs and the ambiguous DNA results from the rental car. Without a confession, a body, or a clear motive, the Policia Judiciaria had nowhere to go. The investigation stagnated, mired in leaks to the press and public acrimony. The intense global spotlight that had once galvanized the search now seemed to only illuminate the investigation's failures and the deep divisions the case had created. This frustrating and painful limbo lasted for nearly a year. Then, in July 2008, a major development occurred. The Portuguese Attorney General announced that the case was being archived. Citing a lack of any new evidence, the investigation was officially shelved. Crucially, with this decision, Kate and Jerry McCann's arguido status was lifted. Legally, they were cleared. It was a moment of profound relief, a vindication that their ordeal at the hands of the Portuguese investigators was over. But the damage had been done. The official closure of the case did not erase the suspicion from the minds of many, a suspicion that was about to be given a powerful and enduring voice. Just days after the case was archived, the man who had led the investigation, Gonçalo Amaral, published a book titled Maddie, A Verdade da Mentira, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie. Amaral had been removed from the investigation in October 2007 for criticizing British police, but he had never abandoned his theory. His book laid out in painstaking detail his belief that Madeleine McCann had died in apartment 5A and that her parents had faked the abduction to cover up their involvement. The book was an instant bestseller in Portugal. It gave a detailed and seemingly authoritative voice to the rumors and suspicions that had been swirling for months. For those who doubted the McCann's story, Amaral's book became their Bible. The McCanns were devastated. They saw the book as a malicious and defamatory attack, not only on their characters, but on the entire effort to find their daughter. They believed that if people believed Madeleine was dead, they would stop looking for her. They launched a lengthy and costly legal battle against Amaral, suing him for libel. This legal fight would drag on for years, through multiple appeals and court rulings, with initial victories for the McCanns eventually being overturned by Portugal's highest courts. The battle over Amaral's book became a bitter proxy war for the entire case, a symbol of the two fiercely opposing narratives that refused to be reconciled. With the official police investigation now closed, the McCanns knew that if Madeleine was to be found, it would be up to them. Using money from the Find Madeleine Fund, which was supported by public donations, they hired their own team of private investigators. It was an extraordinary step for a family to take, essentially launching their own parallel investigation. Over the next few years, a succession of private detective agencies staffed by former police officers and intelligence experts took on the case. They sifted through the voluminous Portuguese police files, re-interviewed witnesses, and chased down thousands of potential leads, from reported sightings in Morocco to conspiracy theories on the internet. Their work was painstaking and often fruitless, a search for a needle in a global haystack. But it served a vital purpose. It kept the case alive. While the private investigators worked behind the scenes, Kate and Jerry McCann continued their public campaign. They gave carefully chosen interviews on the anniversaries of Madeleine's disappearance, ensuring her face was never far from the front pages. They were determined that their daughter would not be forgotten. Their primary goal, however, was to persuade the British government to intervene. They argued that since a British citizen was missing, the British police should have a role. They lobbied politicians, wrote letters, and held meetings, pushing relentlessly for a formal review of the case by UK authorities. For a long time, their pleas fell on deaf ears, but the high-profile nature of the case and the McCann's persistence eventually paid off. In 2011, a significant breakthrough occurred. The then Prime Minister, David Cameron, in response to a direct appeal from Kate McCann, announced that he had asked London's Metropolitan Police, also known as Scotland Yard, to launch a full investigative review of the case. This was a monumental victory for the McCanns. The review was codenamed Operation Grange. The task facing the Operation Grange team was colossal. They had to gather and re-examine the entire case file from the Portuguese authorities, which consisted of over 100,000 pages of documents. They had to translate these documents, digitize them, and build a new, comprehensive picture of everything that was known about the case. The British team approached the evidence with fresh eyes, unburdened by the theories and biases that had bogged down the original investigation. Within a year, the Operation Grange team began to release some of their initial findings, and they were explosive. They systematically dismantled the case that had been built against the McCanns. They concluded that the sniffer dog evidence was highly unreliable and should never have been presented as definitive proof. They also reviewed the complex DNA sample from the hire car and agreed with the original FSS assessment. It was inconclusive and could not be interpreted as a match for Madeleine. Scotland Yard publicly stated that there was no evidence to suggest the McCanns were involved in their daughter's disappearance. They were, and always had been, victims. Instead, Operation Grange refocused the investigation squarely on the original theory: abduction by a stranger. They believed the key to the case lay back in Praia da Luz. They painstakingly reconstructed a timeline of the evening, identifying dozens of potential witnesses who had never been properly interviewed. They uncovered evidence of a significant increase in local burglaries in the months leading up to Madeleine's disappearance, with several instances of intruders gaining access to holiday apartments while families slept. They began to explore a new theory: that Madeleine's disappearance may have been the result of a burglary gone wrong. An intruder, surprised to find a child awake, may have panicked and abducted her. This new line of inquiry opened up a whole new set of possibilities, and for the first time in years, breathed new life into the stalled investigation. Operation Grange was no longer just a review. It was now a full-blown, active investigation, and it was about to identify a new and chilling person of interest. The work of Operation Grange was a seismic shift in the investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance. For years, the narrative had been dominated by the now discredited theory of parental involvement. Scotland Yard's meticulous re-examination of the evidence swept that theory aside and brought the focus back to where it began: the hunt for an unknown abductor. By analyzing phone data, re-evaluating witness statements, and identifying patterns of local crime, the British investigators were slowly piecing together a new picture of what might have happened on May 3, 2007. And at the center of that picture, a dark silhouette began to take shape. A name, previously buried deep within the thousands of pages of the case files, started to rise to the surface. That name was Christian Bruckner. Bruckner, a German national, was a drifter, a petty criminal, and a convicted sex offender who had been living a transient lifestyle in the Algarve region of Portugal between 1995 and 2007. He was a known figure to local police, with a rap sheet that included theft, drug offenses, and the sexual abuse of children. He often lived in a distinctive VW T3 Westphalia camper van and was known to support himself by breaking into holiday apartments and hotel rooms. The exact type of crime that Operation Grange had begun to suspect was linked to Madeline's disappearance. Bruckner had been on the periphery of the investigation for years, one of over 600 individuals who were examined and subsequently discounted in the early stages. But the new, more sophisticated analysis by the British police, particularly of mobile phone data, would change everything. The breakthrough was a single, crucial piece of data. On the night Madeline vanished, a mobile phone registered to Christian Bruckner was in the immediate vicinity of the Ocean Club Resort. At 7:32 p.m., about an hour before Kate McCann would find her daughter's bed empty, Bruckner's phone received a call that lasted for 30 minutes. The call was routed through a mobile phone mast that covered the area where the McCanns were staying. This placed him, with a high degree of certainty, at the scene of the crime, at the critical time. This wasn't just a theory anymore. It was hard data. For investigators, it was a thunderbolt. Working quietly, behind the scenes, British and German police began to build a case. They discovered more disturbing details. The day after Madeline disappeared, Bruckner had re-registered a Jaguar car he owned, transferring it into someone else's name. It was a suspicious move, suggesting a desperate attempt to disassociate himself from the vehicle. Investigators also uncovered a potential witness, a former acquaintance of Bruckner's, who claimed that Bruckner had once shown him a video of him sexually assaulting a woman and had later allegedly confessed to the abduction of Madeleine McCann in a conversation in a German bar. The details were chilling and provided a potential motive that went far beyond a simple burglary gone wrong. The public, however, remained unaware of this intense new focus. Then, in June 2020, 13 years after Madeline vanished, German police, in a coordinated press conference with British and Portuguese authorities, made a stunning announcement. They publicly identified Christian Bruckner as their prime suspect, or Hauptverdächtiger, in the murder of Madeleine McCann. They stated unequivocally that they had concrete evidence to believe Madeline was dead and that Bruckner was responsible. They released images of his distinctive camper van and the Jaguar, launching a massive international appeal for information from anyone who may have known him or seen the vehicles in Portugal in 2007. The news was a global bombshell. It was the most significant development in the case in over a decade. Suddenly, the faceless abductor had a name and a face. Bruckner was already in a German prison at the time of the announcement, serving a sentence for drug trafficking. More chillingly, he had also been convicted in 2019 for the brutal rape of a 72-year-old American woman in her own holiday home in Praia da Luz in 2005, less than 2 years before Madeline disappeared, and in the very same town. The crime bore terrifying hallmarks. He had broken in, he was a sexual predator, and he was operating in that specific location. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to be falling into place with terrifying clarity. In the years following the announcement, German prosecutors, led by Hans Christian Wolters, have continued to build their case against Bruckner. Their investigation has been meticulous and painstaking. They have conducted searches at properties linked to him, including an allotment garden in Hanover, where they excavated the foundations of a demolished cabin. More recently, in May 2023, a major 3-day search operation was conducted at the Barragem do Arade, a remote reservoir in the Algarve, about 50 kilometers from Praia da Luz. It was a place Bruckner reportedly used to visit, referring to it as his little paradise. Using sniffer dogs, radar, and heavy digging equipment, police scoured the shoreline, searching for any trace of Madeline, a piece of clothing, a personal item, or her remains. A number of items were collected and sent for forensic analysis, though the results have not been publicly disclosed. Despite the intense focus and the strong circumstantial evidence, a crucial element is still missing. As of today, Christian Bruckner has not been charged with any crime directly related to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. he denies any involvement. The German prosecutors remain confident in their case, but the evidence, while placing him at the scene and establishing him as a credible suspect, has not yet reached the high threshold required by German law to secure a murder charge, especially without a body. The concrete evidence that Madeleine is dead has never been publicly revealed. The investigation is live and ongoing, a slow, methodical process of trying to find that one final, irrefutable piece of proof that can bring this decades-long search for answers to an end. For Kate and Jerry McCann, the identification of a prime suspect has been a double-edged sword. It has brought a renewed, tangible hope that they might finally get answers about what happened to their daughter. Yet, it is coupled with the devastating belief of the German police that Madeleine is no longer alive. They have never given up hope of finding Madeleine, and have consistently stated that they will not until there is incontrovertible proof of her death. They continue to mark her birthday every year, a painful, public ritual of remembrance and enduring love. Their quiet dignity and unwavering determination in the face of unimaginable, prolonged suffering has been a source of inspiration for many. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is a story with no ending. It is a labyrinth of false leads, flawed investigations, media storms, and profound, unanswered questions. It is a story about a family's love and their refusal to surrender to despair. It is a story that has left an indelible mark on the public consciousness, a cautionary tale that reminds us how a moment of ordinary life can so easily and irrevocably fracture into a lifetime of pain. Despite the years that have passed, despite the prime suspect in a prison cell, the fundamental mystery remains. Where is Madeleine? What truly happened in that small holiday apartment on that warm spring evening in the Algarve? The search for truth, like her parents' hope, endures. Thank you for following us through this incredibly complex and heartbreaking case. The search for answers for Madeleine continues, and it is vital that her story and the stories of all missing children are never forgotten. If you value this in-depth storytelling, please show your support by subscribing to Unsolved on whatever platform you're listening on. Leaving a like, a rating, or a review makes a huge difference and helps others find our work. Please share this with a friend who needs to hear it. We end this series with a thought for Madeleine McCann and for her family, who still wait for a resolution. I'm your host, and this has been Unsolved.